Alabama versus Cincinnati. It's the first game. It's 3:30 Eastern time this Friday, New Year's Eve. Bama, there it is, a 13.5-point favorite right now. It fluctuates. It's been 14. It's been 13.5. But, man, let's dive into this because I want you to do me a favor. I was thinking about this earlier today as I was in standstill traffic on I-95. I want you to go back to August with me. Just play pretend for a second. And I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to say close your eyes so you're not distracted. And so there you close your eyes. I can't. I got to be responsible. We're on air. It's like being behind the wheel of a car. But close your eyes. It's August. And I'm going to tell you there's going to be a team this year that's going to stumble all over itself during the regular season. It's going to lose a game. It's going to be right on the brink of losing multiple other games. So they're going to sputter and sputter and sputter. But boom. They're going to click. They're going to catch fire at just the right time. In a conference championship game, they're going to lock up the number 1 seed, and then all of a sudden it's going to feel like they're shot out of a cannon in the playoff. However, they are still going to have that chip on the shoulder, us against the world, total underdog mentality. You would have thought I was talking about Clemson. You would have thought to yourself, oh, guess Dabo and Clemson are going to get them another one. That is the check mark. That's the box after box after box that you normally check for Clemson. It's normally, all right, well, we're up and down during the regular season, but they peaked at the right time, but they still believe they're like perma underdogs. That's what Alabama is right now. I don't really see them wear this hat that often. In fact, I don't remember ever hearing them go into the playoff and talking about wearing the underdog role. But yet, here they are. I thought that was funny along with the rest of you. But man, they got some Clemson vibes with this team right now. And when I say Clemson vibes, to be clear, I'm talking about that 2016 team, that 2018 team. If they have that about this team, if that's the way that they're going to perform in the postseason, it's probably Bama's title to lose. Now, here's the downside. We don't know. There's a great big ball of mystery around what we should expect from Alabama. So watch the line of scrimmage in this game. I was flying down here last night, and I was texting back and forth with a coach, and he said, brother, you'll know pretty early on. Just watch the line of scrimmage. He put it like this. Now, this is not my breakdown, okay? He said, I don't think Cincinnati matches up either side with them. He went back to the Auburn film, and he said, I think Auburn matches up better with Alabama, both sides of the ball on the line of scrimmage, than do the Cincinnati Bearcats. Now, that's not terrible news because Auburn pushed Alabama to the very brink of losing themselves. But here's what he said. He said, here's what you got to remember. I'm going to circle back to this in just a second. When you're talking G5 versus P5 at this level, not just a generic bowl game, but when you're talking about a G5 team versus a Power 5 playoff team, he put it like this. Cincinnati's 2s are not good enough to play at Cincinnati. Bama's 2s are good enough to play at most Power 5 programs in the country. How much does that matter? Friday. I keep wanting to say Saturday. Cincy's pressure rate. Heard a lot of people talk about this. Cincy's pressure rate, if you just pull up your statistics.com, just choose your website, wherever you want to go, I think it's going to fool you a little bit in this game. If you're looking at the traditional pressure rates that they're able to get, they're able to do a pretty good job. And so you'd look at that computer screen and you'd say, this computer screen looks like it's telling me Cincinnati's going to be able to affect the quarterback and do it with 4 guys. I do not think that's going to be the case. I hope for Cincinnati's sake it is the case, because here's what happens if it's not. If they cannot get pressure, on standard downs especially, if they cannot get pressure with 4 guys, and they do have to dedicate extra men to pressure Bryce Young, ballgame's probably over. Because he will pick you apart. It won't happen immediately in all likelihood, but once they figure out what you're doing, and they will, he will pick you apart. Bryce Young's best quarterback in the country, especially at that. You ask the Georgia Bulldogs. See, the big mystery around Georgia when they played Bama, one of them at least, was, yeah, they're the best statistical defense in the country, but it's a matchup thing. And matchup-wise, where are they going to get pressure from? Adam Anderson's not on the field. Where are they going to get pressure from? Well, the answer was they had to scheme pressure. And a lot of times that meant obviously having to bring more than 4 guys, which left, well, Jamison Williams far too often, or John Mechie far too often, or a tight end or a running back, and you realize how that turned out. It would be that turned up to another level against Cincinnati. That's the first thing you need to watch. How good is Cincinnati at getting pressure, standard downs, 4 guys? Because if they can't do that, and if they're having to dedicate extra guys for 4 quarters, you know, maybe series to series it's different. For 4 quarters, they won't stand up against Alabama. But I don't like to break down these games where there's a big point spread in that manner. What I like to do, those of you who've watched Late Kick for a while, you know this. I like to look at that spread, and okay, it's 13.5 right now. And then I like to ask myself, do I believe there's any kind of shot? that Cincinnati, in this case, can win this game. If I believe there is at least a puncher's chance, what I like to do is I like to forego the traditional breakdown, and I like to ask, okay, if the answer is yes, and the answer is yes for me, I do think Cincinnati has a puncher's chance, how theoretically would that happen? And so I was thinking a little while today about how that could happen. A number of things have to go right, I think, for Cincinnati here. I do think this line's right. We're going to show what the model thinks in a little while, but there's something I use sometimes. It's called the yellow jacket effect, and I save it a lot for when a lower level team, maybe not a caliber, but a level team in terms of their conference, plays up a level. I've always called it the yellow jacket effect. If you've watched the show for a long time, you've heard me talk about this before. Look, if you're a full-grown human being, a yellow jacket's not going to kill you unless you're allergic to them. Yellow jacket's not going to kill you. But if you look over, you're sitting in your living room and you're totally calm, and all of a sudden there's a yellow jacket buzzing next to your face, that doesn't make you jump any less high, knowing that it can't kill you, because there's just momentary reaction, unless you're, a serial killer and your heart rate doesn't get above 80, or you're like Kobe Bryant, when the guy pump faked the ball in his face and he never even moved. I don't think those are real humans. But if you're a normal human and that yellow jacket's next to you, or maybe a wasp is next to you, you jump for a second. How many times have we seen in these settings some of these G5 teams come out with their hair on fire? And they're probably throwing things at that Power 5 team, in this case Alabama, they haven't seen on tape. And it's the spider, it's the wasp, it's the yellow jacket effect. I also call it the cattle prod effect sometimes. How long can you keep a team stunned like that? How long can you keep them on skates, or maybe on the heels of their feet instead of on the balls of their feet? Whatever length of time that is, if Cincinnati does get Bama in that manner, they've got to score points during that process. You can't get latter portion of the first quarter, Alabama looks out of sorts, but it's 3-0 Cincinnati. It's got to be 10, 14. Like, that's what you got to do. You got to put a couple scores on the board. That's the first thing. The second thing we already talked about, they got to get the pressure with 4. I highly doubt that they're going to be successful in that consistently. I mean, when we go back to the SEC title game, I thought the biggest story on Conference Championship Saturday, period, point blank, was Alabama's offensive line answering the challenge, because there was a lot of stuff. Think about the hitch and go to Jamison Williams. Those of you who probably rewatched the game 100 times, it takes time for that play to develop. And the reason why they were able to execute is because Bryce Young had time. I do not think Cincinnati's going to be any more effective without bringing extra guys than Georgia was at pressuring Bryce Young. They got to have, they being Cincinnati, a good plan, speak of the devil, to handle Jamison Williams. And this is where we start to bring the injury situation into focus. John Mechie, who's been a standout for Bama all year, is out for the rest of the year, so he will not play in this game. Now, that's obviously the bad news. The good news is Alabama's not hurting for raw talent in the receiver room. I guess the downside of that is, in terms of proven talent, there really isn't anyone else. It's a bad, quote-unquote, problem to have. Most teams would kill to have this kind of problem. But Trayshawn Holden's a guy that they've used some. Ja'Cory Brooks is a guy they're really excited about. He came on late, made the big catch against Auburn. Ajay Hall had a spring game to end all spring games, hasn't really done anything this year outside of that. JoJo Earl, there are names. I wonder which one or two of those names may pop. Because if Cincinnati can do a half-decent job against Jamison Williams, they are going to be able to focus on him and focus on him times 2 and times 3 until someone else steps up. Beginning of the season, you would have probably thought Jaleel Billingsley, tight end position. Really hadn't been that way for most of the year. And so it's probably going to have to come from A, the wide receiver position, and then B, also the running back position. Because I think Alabama can have a fair amount of success throwing 2 running backs out of the backfield, which leads me to the last point for Cincinnati. Just as I said about Alabama there, Cincinnati's got to be excellent at utilizing the running back position. That doesn't just mean take Jerome Ford and run in between the tackles. That's not how you beat Alabama. If you've watched Alabama, some of the concepts they've struggled with the most are concepts that you've been playing on video games your entire life. Just the simple running back wheel out of the backfield. It can give Nick Saban and his defense fits every now and then. For that matter, Kirby, Mel Tucker, all these guys who run a version of the same defense, you can bite them sometimes. And Jerome Ford is very effective out of the backfield, and he's going to have to be. Also, the mobility of Desmond Ridder, the quarterback there for Cincinnati, it's got to be used. This is not optional. This is not optional at all. He's got to be a weapon. If you go back to the SEC title game and you look at the fact that Bama outrushed Georgia, they did that because Bryce Young picked up enough on the ground with his legs. That's not a focal point of Alabama's offense, but you know it's there when you need it to be. It's got to be a step further than that for Cincinnati and Desmond Ridder. He's got to run the ball effectively to the point where it's always in the back of your mind. When you're a defender, whether the play is going on or whether you're a coordinator on the sideline calling a play. So I look at this. Those are the things I think have to go right for Cincinnati to be in this thing in the fourth quarter. At that point, you just take your chances. But look, I know a lot of you have looked at this and you've said, why should I expect any different result here than I've seen when Bama plays Notre Dame or Bama plays Michigan State? I don't think that's lazy necessarily. I think that's the way, absent of studying film all day, I'd probably look at this. And I haven't been studying film all day. So I have looked at it like that for broad strokes purposes. When we nail down, no, these are not identical teams. There are differences in this Cincinnati team than that Notre Dame team, than that Michigan State team. But the bottom line is you've got every bit as tall a task and every bit the same amount of tumblers have to fall into place. So I tried. And tried. On the flight down here last night, watched about 6 more Cincinnati games and tried to find that path. So let's see what the model thinks, and I'll tell you what I think on this game. The Vegas number is 13.5. For those of you interested, the total there is 57.5. I plugged this into our model. For those of you who haven't followed all year, we just generate our own number. We try and do it like an odds maker. The difference is we don't have to put this number out for people to bet on. So our internal model has Alabama minus a little bit over the number, minus 15, which means it leans slightly Bama to cover. It certainly leans Bama to win. When I looked at what I think is going to be the deciding factor, and I'll go back to it one more time, the inability for Cincinnati to pressure Bryce Young enough without having to give it far too many resources to it, and I thought about that over 4 quarters, I found a 2+ score Alabama win in there more times than not. There is a puncher's chance. I just laid out for you how it would happen if this pick is wrong, but the pick is going to be Alabama to win. The pick is going to be Alabama to cover, and I think what you're probably saying between the 3:30 game and then that 7:30 game, the one we'll be at, is wow, that 1 seed was so valuable for Alabama and Nick Saban to have locked up. Looked like Georgia was going to have it all year. That's the benefit of beating them in the SEC championship game. So we're going to take Alabama to win that one. We're going to take Alabama actually to cover.